Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. To this point, we have reacted a lot to Jordan Peterson. We've seen him in debate context with Kathy Newman, and in conversational context with both Vivek Ramaswamy and Chris Williamson. In the previous debate, he comes out looking very good. That being said, Jordan Peterson does not always exit debates looking so good on the other end. A little over a year ago, there was a conversation that he had with Kyle Kulinski, someone else that we featured on this channel. They talked about a variety of issues, but the clip that really got some significant attention was the discussion on trans issues. It's a topic that Peterson focuses on all the time. It's a topic that the right wing focuses on all the time. People on the left that I listen to generally emphasize that the right wing spends too much time on culture war subjects to pay attention to the more important issues facing normal Americans within the country. Therefore, what ends up happening is when the right and the left actually do get together to have these discussions, the conversations face a lot of very unnecessary combativeness and friction. That is what I believe took place in this interview, and without further ado, let's check it out.
I noticed just the other day you were banned from Twitter. Now, I'm somebody, nobody can argue against my lefty credentials. Everybody knows I'm a man of the left. Having said that, my solution on this issue of social media censorship has always been, look, we need to expand First Amendment protections. And the way you do that is to regulate these big social media companies like they're public utilities. So if you do that, then basically you're saying this is the new public square and people can speak their mind here. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, you can't, dox people or do direct threats of violence or anything anything that's actually illegal will remain illegal. But outside of that, you can't censor people just based on political opinion. So, I definitely wouldn't have banned you, suspended you, etc. But I do have a question about that specific tweet that did get you in trouble because, you said something to the effect of,
well, I don't know if it got me in trouble. I don't think I'm in trouble. Twitter banned me, but I don't consider that trouble.
That's fair enough. Fair point.
I think this moment early on in the interview serves as the epitome of really what this interview was about, which was Jordan and Kyle doing a lot of disagreeing on language and the type of language that was being used. I think Jordan has taken part in so many debates and conversations where he has been disingenuously misrepresented that he goes into these conversations with left-wing individuals expecting to be attacked and misrepresented. In this case, I don't necessarily think it was warranted, and Kyle's demeanor toward Jordan was at times very deferential. I don't know what the banter was before or after the interview, so I'm lacking that context. But if you're engaged in a conversation and you're looking to find genuine common ground with them, to nitpick on very minor connotative language choices is a bit odd. The fact that Jordan views his banning from Twitter to not be an example of him getting in trouble indicates that he and Kyle are in slightly different wavelengths when it comes to what actually constitutes getting in trouble. It's a very superficial disagreement, but it also nicely highlights just how much conflict and disunion is taking place going into this interaction.
But you said something to the effect of, remember when pride was a sin and the criminal physician.
And Ellen Page just had her breasts cut off by a criminal physician.
Criminal physician, exactly. So my question is the physician really criminal? If you agree that adults can decide to transition, then why would the physician be criminal?
To me, that's a completely reasonable question as well. If you believe that it is within the law to allow somebody to have an optional surgery, then why would you describe it as criminal? And you're going to hear Jordan's answer in a moment, which once again emphasizes this disagreement on connotative language.
Don't adults have that right if they want to transition?
Not everything legal isn't criminal.
We can use the term criminal in different connotative senses, where someone is actually not adhering to the law, and we can also use the term criminal to describe something that is just not ethical. It's such a silly disagreement because we haven't actually hashed out anything yet. Two people are using the same terms that they have different connotative interpretations of.
And do they have that right? See, I would have left Ellen Page alone if she hadn't been parading her new abs in a fashion magazine. How many kids do you think she can convince to convert? A 1?
Yeah.
1,000?
There are actually two different questions here that we have to highlight. There's the first question, which pertains to the legality of the procedure itself. The second question is whether someone who chooses to have that surgery should be promoting that behavior to other people in society, including young children. Those are completely different subjects and thus warrant clarification within the conversation. Unfortunately, when we're using terms like legal and criminal, it's hard to separate those questions completely without using a separate set of terms, including a word like ethical.
No, not yeah.
No,
really.
I want to respond to that. I
Yeah.
think that with the trans community, it's very similar to the gay community, where back when that first became a big issue, people thought, oh, if we talk about it, if it's in magazines or whatever, we're promoting kids to go down that path. But really what happened is people are who they are. And if
that
they're
is what
gay, they just
happened.
decided to be
No.
like, yeah, I'm gay. And they were just more open and honest with themselves. So I don't think you're promoting people.
And here will be an ongoing debate between the left and the right on this topic. I think it is a little bit naive of Kyle to actually think that promotion of something in your society isn't going to have a demographic impact on personality temperament. And we can see statistics. I put up this chart before. As time has gone on, as we've moved from the older generation to the younger generation, men are becoming more femininely tempered and the women are becoming more masculinely tempered. Given the general rules of polarity when it comes to sexual attraction, more femininely tempered men are going to be more likely to be gay, and more masculinely tempered women are going to be more likely to be attracted to women as well. It doesn't mean that the phenomenon has completely flipped on itself, but it means that it's moving in a particular direction. Therefore, Kyle's position that it is solely a consequence of people feeling more open to express themselves, I don't think fully follows through. What has all of this resulted in? Well, now we have 1 in 5 Gen Z youth identify as LGBT. You're going to have a very hard time convincing me, Kyle, that there wasn't some social influence at play in altering people's temperaments to the degree where their sexuality would change. The incentives that people on the left tend to place on how one ought to live are in line with women, number one, reproducing less. If you're talking about a climate change issue, something that's widely talked about on the left, you're going to be concerned about resource consumption. And that means that you're going to be telling people to have fewer children. And so people who are adopting these ideological beliefs are going to have fewer children. And so you would expect an adaptation that would develop would be to possess temperamental characteristics that are more homosexual in nature. After all, it is people on the left who talk about how gender is a social construct. If sexuality can be socially influenced, then obviously the social promotion of certain sexualities would have an influence on whether people began to adopt those identities. Both biology and culture play significant roles in shaping human outcomes. Each side, the left and the right, ignore that truth at their own peril.
Putting people to do that.
No,
You're
that's
just
not
saying,
what happened.
if you
You're
are that, it's
completely
okay.
wrong.
Okay, well,
You're utterly
I'm
wrong.
listening.
There's
I'm
nothing
listening.
about that that's right.
So explain.
Well,
I'm
there's been
listening.
an absolute look.
Jordan, I would ask you, when you say something as strong and vociferous as there's nothing about that that's right, do you really think creating a society where favorability toward gay people has increased would not enable people to feel more comfortable coming out in public? And it's really confusing that Jordan Peterson and Kyle would take these diametrically opposed positions without integrating their opponents into their own argument.
There's been an absolute look. One of the reasons that I opposed Bill C-16 in Canada to begin with, this pronoun compelled speech bill, was because I knew perfectly well what was going to happen when we introduced confusion about gender identity into the public sphere. Now, the argument was that if we left people with gender dysphoria alone to make their own way and stop torturing them, that we would decrease the mental health load on those individuals. And my analysis as a clinician was that for every one person of that sort that we hypothetically saved, we doom 1,000 more. as a consequence of confusion and social contagion. I knew the literature on psychogenic epidemics. They used to call that mass hysteria, and it's a literature that goes back about 300 years. And often when you introduce social confusion, you can produce a psychogenic epidemic, especially generally it's adolescent females who are most susceptible to it. So I thought, oh, well, what's going to happen is we'll produce a psychogenic epidemic of gender dysphoria among adolescent females. And that is exactly what's happened. And it isn't the fact that we've freed up people who are in doubt about their identity to be who they are. That may have happened in a tiny minority of cases. It's absolutely and definitely the case that we've doomed thousands of kids to brutal, mutilating surgery and premature sterility. And we've done that on the altar of our hypothetical moral virtue and compassion.
I think it's slightly more nuanced than that. But the large and increasing number of detransitioners would support his claim. If you're going to promote an identity that flies in the face of normal behavior, that inherently means that you're going to have fewer people with whom you can relate. And certain people who do identify as non-binary or trans, I think prize themselves as being somewhat unique, and they want to find other individuals who are unique, and they believe that exploring these new territories outside of the gender binary can enable them to find those people in a way that wouldn't have been accessible if they had just tried to find similar people within the standard binary format. And certainly there have been people deceived by excessive promotion of this phenomenon. We are creating confusion because the people to whom we are promoting these ideas are not yet intellectually mature enough to grapple with such a massive change to the culture that has existed for such a long time. And I'm mainly talking about the way that Western culture has devised these categories. I'm reading the book Sexing the Body right now by Anne Foster Sterling. There's an example in Papua New Guinea where a group that has a higher prevalence of a deficiency of the 5A reductase enzyme ends up creating this third category of gender where when the child is younger, they appear more as a female, but as they become older, they sort of transform into a male. And there's a whole separate role that's defined for this alternative life trajectory, let's say. In our society, figuring out where certain transgender individuals fit and all of these different categories fit in their own unique social role has not yet been clearly outlined. And there's not really good narrative to bind this group of people together. The way we are going about promoting transgender identity is unscrupulous, and it's harming a lot of people. But that does not mean that there aren't certain people that benefit from their transgender identity. Okay.
Corporate analysis of the trans surgery industry last week. Growth rate projection for you lefty types and your anti-corporatism. Growth rate projection, 15% per year. Invest now. A $350 million business as of 2022, projected to expand to $750 million by 2027.
And it's true. There are a ton of economic incentives that are pushing us in this direction. Just pretend as if, oh no, there's no agenda that's promoting people to have transgender surgery that happens to be in alignment with the medical establishment enriching themselves. That's completely disingenuous. Are there people who genuinely care about certain people's authentic identities and they just want people to be able to live their best lives? Yes. Are there people that are looking to exploit this trend in order to enrich themselves? You better believe it.
No moral hazard there. There's plenty of moral hazard there. And that surgery is absolutely brutal.
So what percentage of the population do you think, in your conception of how this is unfolding, what percentage of the population do you think is going to end up being trans at the end of this? Do you think like one day it's going to be like 70% of the country is trans?
Well, we know already that about 1 in 5 adolescents now identifies, to use that hated word, identifies as part of the hypothetical LGBTQ plus community. So it's 1 in 5. I don't know what the upper limit is. There's a consulting group in the UK now that's claiming there's 150 different genders. There's actually, I suppose, 7 billion different genders if you want to get technical about it, because everybody's temperament differs. But I don't know what the upper limit is. And I have no idea what the upper limit is for this surgical intervention. We'll see. But I don't find it, I don't find it the least bit acceptable. And if you think that your compassion is demanding that you extend your pity to the LGBTQ plus community at the cost of sterilizing children, you should think again. You're on the wrong side of this, and not in a trivial way.
I would appreciate if you don't ascribe beliefs to me that I don't have. Remember, my original.
And there you go. You're getting to see some of the hostility that Jordan is bringing to this conversation, I think somewhat unduly. Again, I don't know the pre-debate context here. I don't know what Jordan went into the interview believing about Kyle. There are moments where Kyle comes across as very smug and condescending when he's addressing certain right-wingers on his show, but at least in how he's talking to Jordan at this precise moment, I don't think the way Jordan is interacting with him is warranted. He is sort of trying to ascribe particular beliefs to Kyle that align with Peterson's own version of what a left-winger on these issues is supposed to believe.
My original question was
well,
about...
you said earlier in this question that,
I said
that
Elliot Page is an adult, and so do you think that he has the right to transition? That was the original question.
You made some comments after that. Yeah, but as a star and a public figure and a model for emulation, she also has the responsibility not to entice confused adolescents into a catastrophic decision before they have the maturity to make that decision.
I just have to say, Jordan, I think it's a little bit of a moral panic. I just don't see some sort of, frenzy of
what
people
would you
wanting
consider...
to become trans.
And this is the perspective from people on the left more so, that there are just more pressing issues to be considered, that all of this focus on increased levels of transgender identification or LGBTQ identification isn't really a problem. It does mean that reproduction rates are going to go down. And so if you're looking for a sufficient population to replace the existing generation, then yeah, you're going to need sufficient reproduction. At the same time, our tools for the 21st century are getting better. We aren't going to need as many people to operate future iterations of the economy as we do right now. That trend is going to continue on into the future. And so whether population decline will be as devastating as some people say, I don't fully know. It's hard to project these things the further into the future we try to go. It's why certain climate models, to use a common right-wing argument, are often very unreliable. Because the further and further into the future we try to project, the more inaccurate the model is going to be. Let's continue.
First of all, that's a hell of a way to put it.
Why
don't you take a look at the increase in surgical interventions and see what you think? I mean, how many do you think is too many?
Again,
if we're talking about
I'll answer your question. The argument is it used to be very repressed because that's very outside of the tradition and the norm and the standard. And that now when you sort of let the boot off the neck a little bit.
What used to be suppressed?
The entire LGBTQ community. I mean, it was very recently we even got gay marriage in the United States.
First of all, they're not a community.
You would have to define, I think, a little bit better than that, what exactly it means to be a repressed member of the transgender community or a repressed member of a community that does not align with the traditional binary self-categorization. Once again, Kyle, the claim that comes from the left is that these kinds of gender identities are socially constructed, and therefore the idea that it was suppressed in some way that is preventing people from aligning their gender identity with the opposite sex is a little bit confusing, because this is the fundamental question. Do we believe that we should be in the business of aligning one's brain to one's body, or should we be in the business of aligning one's body to one's brain? And to me, the answer is very clear. We want to align people's brains in a way where they feel comfortable with their bodies, where they feel comfortable with who they are, not the other way around. Because a brain, especially when you're a child, is very neuroplastic. And so we can alter that brain in a way where one would feel comfortable with the body in its current form, or we can alter that brain in a way where it wouldn't feel comfortable with the body in its current form. And right now, we are choosing a society where an increasing number of people believe that they had a brain that was born in the wrong body. First of all, it's completely incoherent, because that implies that the phenomenon of being transgender is not a social construct and that it is biological. But simultaneously, if we're in the interest of bringing peace to people who are confident in their bodies the way they are without optional surgical intervention, then we should be aligning the brain to the body. I talked about this topic a bunch in my Myth of Mental Illness video, so if you haven't watched that, you can check that out. Click the link up there. Okay, let's continue. A few more minutes here.
Well, you
What
understand
is
the point
this
I'm making.
community? No, actually, neither I understand it nor you, and that's why we're delving into it. First of all, they're not a community.
And again, I don't think there's any reason to be so combative here. If I were having this conversation with Kyle right now, there's actually room here to bridge some common ground. Peterson has this opportunity, and I think he's squandering it. But it makes sense because he's so used to being in these confrontational settings that it's hard to adapt his behavior to new contexts.
Catchphrase, it's a buzzword. And I'll tell you something else, that almost all the kids who are undergoing surgical intervention, the clinical literature is absolutely clear on this. 80% of kids with gender dysphoria identify as homosexual when they mature. 80%.
It's an interesting statistic. I actually don't know if this is contended, depending on who you talk to. I'm guessing it is. This is something that I've often questioned myself. I think we've had a very difficult time defining the difference between a transgender woman and a gay male in terms of temperament, in terms of characteristics, in terms of behavior. You have a different solution to your own set of temperamental circumstances. And the definition that's provided on the left for what a woman is, having some kind of social role of desiring to be a woman, is by nature a circular definition. It's a definition that uses the word itself to define itself.
And that means the vast majority of people who are being converted surgically are gay. Now, how is that an advantage to the gay community precisely?
No, see, I'm not taking a position in any way, shape, or form on the kids, because I don't know the first thing about this to comment on the kids. Well, but see, that's why we're having this conversation, though, is because my original question was about
kids.
The adults and what your take is on the adults. And it sounds to me like, let me ask you this, would you ban transition surgery for adults?
I don't know.
Really?
Yeah.
And this is where I completely disagree with Jordan Peterson. No matter how nefarious you view this societal motive as being, it is fundamentally an optional procedure at the end of the day. I think we have to alter the incentives behind this kind of behavior and this kind of surgery. But the idea that you would ban it? It's the same concept of prohibiting alcohol. You try to ban these things, you're really not getting at the root issue. The issue is the incentives that we have in place. And if those incentives are unhealthy, then they must be revealed as being unhealthy. But you are not going to accomplish the aims in a responsible manner by banning the procedure. Jordan is very irritated here that Kyle refuses to take a stand on banning the surgery for children. I understand his frustration. I'm often annoyed when people on the left aren't able to make this distinction. You are not able to get a tattoo in most states until you are age 18. It's different in certain states, it's 16, but you are not allowed to vote until you are age 18. You are not allowed to drink alcohol until you are 21. The idea that we would give power to children to alter an evolutionary mechanism that has hundreds of thousands, even millions of years of history consolidating it, it just doesn't make sense. And in Kyle's desire to not piss certain people off on his side, in my mind, he's keeping his mouth shut on the issue. Because he knows he could be pilloried if he were to say the wrong thing. And at the same time, he also knows there are generally more important issues to be discussed, and he doesn't want to sacrifice his career in order to say what he might actually believe on the topic. That's just a suspicion I have.
It was an an act of stunning hubris to conduct the first trans surgery procedure. And it's not obvious to me at all that it's been a net social good. And
But
so,
aren't there some people that are obviously trans who were born in one body, they feel like they're in the other body, and when they're an adult, they can make the decision? And then even from just a freedom and liberty perspective, shouldn't they have that right?
As someone who's explored the intake of psychedelic substances, psilocybin specifically completely dissolves the boundaries that you traditionally feel on a day-to-day basis. It would not be an exaggeration to say that I have felt a deeper feminine instinct inside me, where my normal instincts are being overridden in some way as a result of the essence of this substance that I put in my body. That disunity between gender and sex can be experienced. And yet to say that there are people who are just very obviously trans, what do you mean your brain wants to be in a different body by design? Again, it really comes down to, are we going to place more of a primacy on the brain or the body as the determining factor as to what somebody is? Given that the brain is something that can be altered chemically, not only by intaking drugs, but simply through behavioral modification and instilling different values. I think it's foolish to start from the brain as the thing that you're supposed to model the body based off of. It flies in the face of the whole social construction argument, really.
Even if they do it and then they regret it, shouldn't they have the right to try it?
it's a good question. I mean, it's a tricky one, right? Because there's all sorts of surgical enhancement procedures that are it's not obviously appropriate to make
Plastic
them illegal.
surgery.
And I don't know exactly
Boob
where the
enhancements.
cutoff line is, so to speak. And that's partly why
Butt
we're having a public
implants,
discussion.
or whatever
about it.
these people are
But,
doing these days.
This entire argument, in many ways, is stated so idiotically that it almost defies description. I mean, what do you mean feel like you're in the wrong body?
Well,
What kind of measurement is that? Now, hang on a sec.
I was going to
There
answer.
are rules for these sorts of diagnostic decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The rule is that you have to make a valid and reliable diagnosis. That's if you're diagnosing depression or anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder or
using
cancer or
psychological
anything like that.
terms.
There are standards that you have to abide by
Mm.
in order to make a diagnosis, in order to fulfill the obligations of your professional college. If someone comes to you and says, I feel like I have lung cancer, that is not sufficient grounds upon which to formulate a diagnosis, much less proceed to surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, what do you mean by feel? What is that? Is that an emotion? Is it a motivation? Is it a philosophical conclusion? What is it?
Let me explain.
feeling.
Let me explain to you what I mean. So I've been doing my show for about a decade, and about 2 or 3 years into doing my show, there were, some stories here and there that I covered about the trans issue. Somebody who is trans reached out to me and explained to me in a very straightforward way, yeah, look, I was born biologically female. I feel like I'm biologically male. My reality never lined up. Well, I'm just explaining what they said, and then you can respond however you'd like to respond. And they told me as soon as I got the surgery, changed the way I dressed, changed the way I appeared, I felt phenomenally better. And so that's why, at least for me, this was the answer. Now, I think it would be incredibly arrogant.
And I think that can be the answer for certain people. Whether it's the optimal answer for most people in this kind of situation, that's a different question. So you sort of have to approach it from a case-by-case basis. But let's let...
For me to say back to that person, no, you shouldn't do that, or I know better than you do for yourself. Now, that's not to say that every time somebody does this, it works out well, of course, because everybody's an individual. But in some instances, that's the answer. So, me as a simple outsider, I just look at it and say, hey, whatever floats your boat, and if it works, it works.
Look, most of the time, my attitude is you can go to hell in handbasket any way you choose if you're an adult. Now, this problem is complicated and compounded by the fact of the necessity of medical involvement and the ethics on the medical front. So when you asked me about how that should be regulated, my answer was, I'm not exactly sure about that.
Yep,
Although it isn't obvious to me that it's obvious to me that the trans surgery enterprise has gone way too far, thousands of people too far. And I'm certain that it's harmed exponentially more people than it's helped.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible.
Well, it was certainly a lively discussion. Once again, that last statement that Kyle made, that it would be hubris to assume that I had a better understanding of this person's identity than they did of themselves, is a reasonable statement. we should be careful about making those declarations. At the same time, people on the left and people who have these identities, I think, should be prepared to answer questions. Not everybody is just going to hop on board, and I don't think it's fair to expect the majority population to immediately hop on board. To me, that's what's providing the conservative side of this country and the conservative side of this issue so much anxiety. They feel that their normal interests are being overridden by minority interests. You're going to have to make somebody unhappy at the end of the day. And you can argue, yeah, historically, we haven't treated these minority groups very well. I would be on board with you in that argument. But that shouldn't necessarily be grounds to completely flip the onus of responsibility on the majority of adapting to that minority. But look, difficult issues, and it was an interesting conversation. Anyway, guys, I know I have a pretty large conservative audience, so you're probably not used to listening to people that support transgender identity in any capacity, but perhaps my perspective on this is a little bit more nuanced than you're used to hearing from people on the left. I guess I can't fully call myself pro-trans with all of the hedges that I put in my advocacy for the position, but I'm more pro-trans than Matt Walsh. Let's put it like that. I think that's safe to say. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.